Okay, hear me out. What if Star Wars was actually a metaphor for the fall of Tartaria? Now, obviously, Star Wars is a mythic sci-fi narrative and the Tartarian story is an alternative history. But let's break it down because there are some interesting parallels. In a world before recorded history, according to both narratives, there existed a vast, harmonious civilization that spanned the globe. In Star Wars, this was the Old Republic, an era of peace and unity before the business of war and politics corrupted it. And in the Tartaria story, it was the harmonious era of the Tartarian Empire, a time of great art and technological advancement, cathedrals, giant doors, free energy spires all across the land. In both stories, these golden ages were cut short by a sudden, dramatic fall. In Star Wars, the Republic fell to the dark side, taken over by the Sith, who established an evil galactic empire. And in the Tartarian narrative, the empire was destroyed in the 1800s or 1900s, supposedly wiped away by catastrophic mud floods, wars, fires, and deliberate resets. In both cases, much of the old wisdom and surviving knowledge was deliberately suppressed, rewritten, or hidden away. In Star Wars, the Jedi were forced underground, their teachings forbidden or destroyed. And in the Tartarian story, those who survived the fall and carried the flame of the old wisdom were branded crazy, ignorant, or dangerous. Their knowledge of free energy, healing tech, and advanced architecture was suppressed and eventually became dismissed as mere myth. In both stories, the death of the old way of life was not just physical but mental, a deliberate campaign to erase, rewrite, and distort the past. In Star Wars, the Empire created a false narrative that made the Jedi seem like a bunch of weirdos, cultish figures from a forgotten past, when in reality, they were the heroes who had kept the peace. And in the Tartarian story, the powers that be, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and their ilk, painted a picture of a world where Tartaria never existed, erasing it from textbooks and maps and making it seem like the idea of Tartaria is some kind of crazy delusion. Yet despite the Jedi and the Tartarians being hunted, beaten down, and living in fear, hope flickers on in both stories. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and a few companions fight to restore the truth about the Jedi, to bring back balance to the Force. And in the Tartarian story, researchers and truth seekers keep digging, unearthing artifacts, photos, documents, any scraps of evidence they can find to prove that Tartaria was real and to reveal the suppressed. History. Both stories show us how history is often manipulated, how the victors write the history books, and how entire civilizations can be erased from memory. The heroes of both stories have been labeled as crazy, kooks, tinfoil hat heads, conspiracy theorists. But as more and more people wake up to the lies and seek the truth, the day may come when we learn the lessons of the Jedi and the Tartarians, when we rediscover the wisdom of the ancients and the power of the suppressed past. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do these two stories feel so similar? Why does the story of Tartaria remind me of Star Wars? Well, as it turns out, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, openly based his story on something called Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Also known as the hero with 1,000 faces, Campbell, a legendary professor of literature, studied myths and stories from all over the world and throughout history. He noticed a common thread, a repeating pattern of a hero who goes on a journey, faces challenges, and in the end restores balance or defeats evil. This pattern, as Campbell saw it, is the fundamental story, the mythum that all other stories are based on. It's the story of transformation, of facing fears and ultimately triumphing. So when George Lucas was creating Star Wars, he was working with this universal story structure. He took ancient myths, reimagined them in a space opera setting, and wove them together with elements from mythology and folklore. Now, what's fascinating is that this same story structure, the monomyth, appears in the Tartarian story as well. You've got the rise of a great civilization, the fall brought on by dark forces, and then the effort to recover hidden knowledge and restore balance. It's the same basic narrative structure, a tale as old as time itself. In a way, it's like Star Wars and the Tartarian story are the different versions of the same story, one told through science fiction and the other through alternative history. They both use the same story structure, the monomyth, to tell their tales. So if the story feels familiar to you, if you've heard it before, that's because you have. It's one of the oldest stories ever told, the story of light and dark, of good and evil, of the eternal struggle between opposing forces and the quest to bring balance back to the world. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to see more.